Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. But since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he had said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they came down from the mountain, a great crowd met them. Just then, a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. The congregation may see. The other day I was cleaning up the kitchen after Maddie and I had baked chocolate chip cookies. We have been remodeling our kitchen since 2 days after Christmas, and so it was a welcome grace in my life to just be able to bake cookies. Growing up, my mom and I used to bake cookies regularly. It's one of my dearest memories. Whether it was Christmas time or dessert for a gathering or just an ordinary Monday, we did cookies. And so I do cookies. I baked cookies with my boys when they were younger, and I let them lick the beater. It's a special treat, and I know you're not supposed to let kids lick batter anymore because of the raw eggs or whatever, but we did it. All 3 of them would pile up on the counter waiting their turn to measure and crack and mix. And then as they grew, they would dash through the kitchen and grab a warm cookie on their way out the door to play with their friends. In those days, I made double batches of cookies, because my front door was like a revolving door for preteen boys who they would just run through my house at any given time. And now that I have 2 of my boys in college, I send them cookies in care packages, enough for them to share with friends as a way of sending a slice of home to them. And now I have a new helper, my Miracle Maddie. She counts to 3 as she cracks eggs on the edge of the bowl. And she tries to sneak chocolate chips out of the bag. And she enthusiastically exclaims how very, very good the vanilla smells. I am lucky. Really, really lucky. I don't know what I did to deserve the gracious love that I have found in this world, but I am thankful. And so the other day, when Maddie skipped through the kitchen and swiped a cookie after I had told her no more, and then she sort of giggled her way off, I just stood there with soapy hands and a towel over my shoulder, dumbfounded. What just happened? And I was overcome in that moment with memories of my childhood, my boys' childhood, and how very quickly time slips by. And I just kept thinking, slow down. Just slow down, as if I was trying to wish her to stay in these moments just a little bit longer. Now, of course, she can't, and she won't. Her growing up is happening every day before my eyes, and most of the time, I miss it. And the fact that my boys aren't babies anymore just magnifies this reality for me. However, her littleness, in contrast to my boys' bigness, also brings back memories in the boys' lives that I had long since tucked away in the crevices of my heart. Their faces flash before my eyes as I'm left standing at the kitchen counter, pondering how every once in a while, something tender, something incandescent, something alive transfigures the human face so much that it's almost beyond bearing. Time and space collapse, and the world somehow becomes full of promise again. And I see God in them as clear as day, shining brightly, radiantly, and pure before me. Now, it's entirely beyond explanation, of course. However, when Peter stammers, "Shall we build 3 tents?" I wonder if maybe it's akin to my longing to just stay in the pure, unadulterated simplicity of God that sometimes graces my kitchen. Because it's so very rare. Maybe it's not rare that it shows up, but it is rare that I slow down enough and catch a glimpse of all that transfigures before my eyes. Peter and James and John almost miss what is right before their eyes because they're falling asleep. And oh, for all the moments that I have slept through. And so for all the moments that Peter has missed God's face, and for all the moments that Peter will deny God's face, right now, he aches to linger where everything is dazzling and clear. Because tomorrow will be different. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's as it should be. Maybe the transfiguration of Jesus isn't the main event. We always act like it is. But meanwhile, as the heavens broke open, there's this kid who suffered greatly for hours on end at the bottom of the mountain, who never ever saw Jesus' face shine, who never saw his clothes shimmer, never heard that thunderous voice from above. All he knows is for a moment, heaven touched earth, and heaven touched him, and his life was transfigured before his very eyes. Maybe the transfiguration resides in the meanwhiles. I stand transfixed at the kitchen counter, immersed in the beauty of innocence for a moment. Meanwhile, the anxiety which pounds in my heart because of looming deadlines and unending piles of laundry distracts my gaze, pulling me from the graces sent my way. And no longer do I see the face of God clearly. I sit in church on Sunday morning and bask in the sweet presence of God's Spirit as light radiates upon my shoulders. Meanwhile, others cry silent tears because of the ache of God's absence feels cold and unbearable. Meanwhile, my mountain lies right next to your valley. Meanwhile, pain does not cancel out joy. Meanwhile, today does not eclipse tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly how to say it, except that it all seems to live so very close together. Maybe it's not exactly on par with what happened to Jesus, but I think that's what I saw that day in the kitchen. Hope and promise, and poignancy and loss, regret and sorrow, joy and innocence, suffering and miracle. It all lives together. And somehow it all becomes this luminescent thing that reflects heaven to earth. And I think that's what shines forth from Jesus on the mountain and in the valley. I don't know that baking cookies transform my boys' lives, or Maddie's life, or my mom's life. I know it's not a monumental mountain moment in history. But I do know that somehow those moments transfigure my life, granting me vision and helping me remain open to when surprises do occur. Somehow cookies in the kitchen speak pause to all the meanwhiles. Somehow cookies with the kids illuminate all that is good and right. Somehow cookies with mom helped me to see Jesus' face shining before I even knew what I was looking at. I think the transfiguration is mostly about allowing our eyes to be open enough to see glory when it skips on in and touches the earth. Because it all happens every day before my eyes. It's just that every so often the veil is pulled back enough that I'm able to see clearly. Now, I am acutely aware that I have reduced the transfiguration of Jesus Christ on Mount Tabor to a pedestrian chocolate chip cookie recipe, some giggles, a whole lot of calories, and a handful of memories. But I'm pretty sure that cookies in this case is just a metaphor for the glory of God. And meanwhile, the Roman and Jewish authorities are plotting Jesus' death. Meanwhile.